The phone rang loudly in the showroom, breaking the uncomfortable silence. It was almost as if everyone knew something was coming, but they had no idea just how big it would be. The showroom manager, Tom Williams, hesitated as he picked up the phone. He had just sent the elderly woman out of the showroom, her face still pale from the humiliation. The laughter of the salespeople echoed in the back of his mind, the memory of her being pushed out like she was nothing. "Hello," Tom said, trying to sound casual, even though he had a sinking feeling in his stomach. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, but there was something in it that made Tom's heart race. "Is this Tom Williams, the manager of the Silverstone luxury cars showroom?" the voice asked. "That's me," Tom replied, trying to sound confident. "How can I help you?" "My name is Gregory Harrison. I'm calling from the corporate office of Silverstone Motors," the voice said. "I need to confirm if a woman in a blue scarf visited your showroom today. Can you tell me if she was there?" Tom's mind flashed back to the elderly woman he had just thrown out, the one who had come in asking to see a luxury car, only to be treated like she didn't belong. He remembered the judgment in the eyes of the younger staff, the rude comments they made behind her back. Yes," Tom answered, his voice shaking slightly. "She came in, but we didn't sell her anything." He quickly added, "She didn't seem to be serious about buying." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Tom could feel the tension building. Something wasn't right. "I see," Gregory said, his voice growing colder. "Let me make this clear, Tom. That woman is our new silent partner." Tom's blood ran cold. Silent partner? What was he talking about? "She owns 40% of our shares," Gregory continued, as if the words themselves were meant to leave a lasting impact. "She is a billionaire. And you just pushed her out of your showroom like she was some nobody." Tom felt the world shift beneath him. His mouth went dry. A billionaire. The woman in the blue scarf. The one they had all laughed at. It couldn't be true. He had to be hearing things wrong. But the voice on the phone wasn't done. "Do you realize the mistake you've made?" Gregory asked, his tone sharp now. "We are sending someone to your showroom immediately to investigate this. Do you understand, Tom?" Tom felt his hands tremble as he held the phone to his ear. He had just humiliated a billionaire, someone who owned nearly half of Silverstone Motors. The showroom staff had thought it was funny. They'd mocked her clothes, her simple shoes. They had assumed she didn't belong because she didn't look like the typical luxury car customer. No one had bothered to ask her name, let alone learn who she really was. And now, the very woman they had mocked was about to shake their world. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He tried to find something to say, some way to explain, but it was too late. "You're all in trouble now, Tom," Gregory's voice echoed in his ear. "The company is already aware of what happened. There will be consequences." And then the line went dead. Tom slowly lowered the phone from his ear, his hands still shaking. His heart pounded in his chest as the gravity of the situation hit him. He couldn't breathe. How could he have been so foolish? He turned slowly to look around the showroom. The young salesman who had mocked the woman earlier, Jason, was standing near the counter, talking to another customer. Tom could see the smug smile on his face, completely unaware of what was coming. But that smile would soon fade. Tom's mind raced. He needed to act fast. He grabbed the store's office phone and dialed his assistant, Emma. "Get everyone in the back office now," Tom ordered. His voice was shaking with panic. Moments later, Emma and the rest of the staff gathered in the small break room at the back of the showroom. Tom's heart was still racing as he paced in front of them. "What's going on, Tom?" Emma asked, clearly concerned. "Shut the door," Tom said, his voice low. "We've made a huge mistake." He explained everything. The phone call, the woman in the blue scarf, how she was a silent partner who owned 40% of the company. The shock on their faces was enough to tell him that none of them had any idea what they had just done. Jason, who had been so proud of mocking the woman, looked like he might pass out. His face turned white as he stammered, We didn't know. How were we supposed to know? Does it matter? Tom asked, his voice filled with frustration. It's too late for that now. We need to fix this. Everyone stood in stunned silence as the reality of their actions sank in. Tom's phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen. A message from Gregory Harrison popped up. Someone is on their way to your showroom. Be ready. Tom felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. He knew that this was only the beginning. The woman in the blue scarf wasn't just a wealthy partner. She was someone who now held power in the company. And that meant everything was about to change. Heads were going to roll. He could only hope that whatever punishment was coming would be enough to make everyone realize the mistake they had made. But deep down, Tom knew this wasn't just about him or his staff. It was about the lesson that no one should ever be judged by their appearance. And that lesson was about to hit harder than anyone could imagine. The showroom was filled with the sound of chatter, the click of expensive shoes on the marble floor, and the occasional ring of a phone. It was an ordinary afternoon at Silverstone Luxury Cars, a place where the wealthy came to make their dreams come true, where the cars were sleek, the prices were high, and the customers expected nothing but perfection. But in the back office, something unusual was happening. The younger salespeople were talking about the elderly woman who had just been thrown out. They couldn't stop laughing, and every laugh felt like a sharp reminder that someone had just been humiliated. Jason, one of the younger salesmen, was practically choking with laughter as he leaned against the break room counter. Did you see the way she looked? He chuckled, shaking his head. A woman like that, coming in here, trying to buy a car. She was probably just looking for handouts. It was late afternoon when the phone call came through at Silverstone Luxury Cars, but this time, it wasn't from the showroom staff. This call would change everything. Tom was in his office, reviewing some paperwork, trying to push the uneasy feeling in his gut aside. The conversation earlier with his staff had been difficult, but at least he had made them understand that they needed to change their approach. He couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't fully grasped the severity of their actions. After all, they had mocked a woman who might have been just another customer to them, but in truth, she was someone with a story they couldn't possibly have imagined. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of his office phone. He glanced at the screen and saw the number. Corporate office. He picked up the phone, trying to sound casual. Silverstone Luxury Cars, Tom Williams speaking. There was a brief silence before a calm, steady voice spoke from the other end. Mr. Williams, this is Gregory Harrison, calling from the corporate office of Silverstone Motors. Is this a good time to speak? Tom's heart skipped a beat. Gregory Harrison. That name was known throughout the company as one of the most influential executives. He was a senior leader, someone whose opinion carried weight. Tom quickly straightened up in his chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the conversation about to unfold. Yes, Mr. Harrison, Tom replied, his voice steady. How can I assist you? I'm calling regarding an incident that took place earlier today at your showroom, Gregory said, his tone formal, but with an undercurrent of something more serious. A woman in a blue scarf visited your location, and I'm told she was asked to leave. Tom froze. He immediately thought of the elderly woman, the same one they had all laughed at. He felt a sick feeling rise in his chest, realizing just how much trouble this could be. Yes, she was here, Tom stammered, trying to gather his thoughts. But, she didn't seem serious about purchasing anything. She didn't really fit the profile of our typical customer. Gregory interrupted him, his voice now colder. Mr. Williams, I'm afraid you've misunderstood. The woman in question is not only a serious buyer, but she also holds a very significant position within our company. In fact, she is one of our silent partners, and she owns 40% of our shares. Tom's mouth went dry. 40%. I'm sorry, sir. I don't think I understand, Tom replied, his voice trembling despite himself. He had no idea what was going on. You're saying she's a partner. But how? Gregory cut him off, his voice now more firm, almost disbelieving. She is Eleanor James, one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. She has more influence in this company than you could ever imagine. And you just had her thrown out like she was some kind of beggar. Tom was stunned. He could barely process the words. He had thrown out a billionaire, a woman who owned 40% of Silverstone Motors. The gravity of his mistake was becoming clearer by the second. I didn't know, Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't seem like one of our regular customers, I thought. Gregory's voice cut through the silence, sharp and authoritative. That's the problem, Mr. Williams. You and your staff judged her based on appearances. The woman you humiliated today is someone who could make or break careers in this company. And now, she's furious. Tom felt his heart pound in his chest. His head spun. He had made a huge mistake. Not just a small error in judgment, but a mistake that could cost him his job. And worse, the future of the showroom. We are sending someone over right now to investigate the situation, Gregory continued. We'll be taking appropriate action once we've assessed what happened, and I expect you to cooperate fully. With that, the line went silent, and Tom slowly lowered the phone. He was still trying to process the magnitude of what had just been said. Eleanor James, a billionaire, a silent partner of Silverstone Motors. How could he have been so blind? Tom stared at his desk for a long moment, his mind racing. How had it come to this? His staff had mocked her, laughed at her, treated her like she didn't belong. And she owned 40% of their company. Tom stood up from his desk, feeling dizzy. He needed to talk to his assistant, Emma. But before he could leave his office, the showroom door opened. A man in a dark suit entered, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the showroom. He was tall, with dark, serious eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor. He carried an air of authority, and Tom immediately knew who he was. The tension in the showroom was unbearable. Tom could feel the eyes of every staff member on him as the suited man moved swiftly through the showroom floor. It was as if the air had thickened with the weight of their mistakes. His staff was quietly whispering among themselves, and every so often, a nervous glance would be exchanged. No one knew what would happen next, but they all feared the worst. The man from corporate didn't waste any time. He asked for each salesperson to come into a small conference room at the back of the showroom, one by one. His questions were straightforward, his tone firm. He didn't need to say much to make them all nervous. The thought of facing a corporate investigator made everyone uneasy. Jason, the young salesman who had laughed the loudest at the elderly woman, was the first to be called in. He walked into the room, trying to look confident, but his hands were trembling slightly. "Please, take a seat," the investigator said, motioning to the empty chair across from him. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness behind it that made Jason uncomfortable. Jason sat down, trying to steady his breath. How can I help you?" he asked, forcing a smile. The investigator didn't return the smile. "You were present when the elderly woman, Eleanor James, visited your showroom today." Jason's heart skipped a beat. His stomach dropped. Eleanor James. The name rang in his ears like an alarm. He had no idea who she was at the time, but now he understood the magnitude of his mistake. He nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes, I was." "What happened when she entered?" The investigator's eyes never left Jason's face. Jason's mind raced. He couldn't lie. He knew that much. The truth would come out one way or another. So he took a deep breath and said, "Well, she didn't look like she could afford a car from our showroom. She was old, and her clothes didn't match the typical clientele we get here." The investigator raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. I made some comments," Jason stammered, his voice faltering. "I didn't think she was serious. She didn't seem like someone who could afford one of our cars, you know. And we kinda laughed about it. After she left, I didn't think much of it. The investigator leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You thought she didn't belong here because of her appearance. Jason swallowed hard, realizing the full weight of his actions. I guess we all did. The investigator paused, then spoke again, his voice slow and deliberate. The woman you humiliated today, Jason, owns 40% of this company. Jason's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mind couldn't quite process it. A woman who had been dressed in a simple blue scarf, looking like she didn't belong, was one of the largest shareholders of Silverstone luxury cars. It didn't seem possible. Are you telling me, Jason finally managed to say, that she's one of the owners? Yes, the investigator replied, his voice cold. And she's not just any owner. She's a billionaire. A very powerful woman. And the way you treated her is unacceptable. Jason felt a wave of shame wash over him. How could he have been so blind? How could he have judged her just because of her appearance? He had been a part of a system that valued looks over substance, and now it was all coming crashing down. Meanwhile, in the front of the showroom, the rest of the staff were anxiously waiting their turn to be questioned. Emma, who had been one of the first to laugh, stood at the counter, unable to focus on her work. She kept glancing nervously at the office where the investigator was speaking with her colleagues. She had never felt so guilty in her life. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the moment when the elderly woman had walked in. She had felt a little uncomfortable at first, but she hadn't said anything out loud. But the others had, and she had been part of it. She had laughed along with them. Now, Emma was starting to understand the seriousness of the situation. Eleanor James was more than just a wealthy woman. She was a force to be reckoned with, and Emma had treated her like she didn't matter. Her guilt grew heavier with each passing minute, and she found herself dreading the investigator's questions. What could she possibly say to make this right? Outside, Eleanor James was sitting in her car, parked just a short distance from the showroom. She had made her presence known, but she wasn't done yet. She had already made sure the corporate office knew who she was, and now she was waiting to see how the staff would handle the consequences of their actions. She wasn't in a hurry. She didn't need to rush things. In fact, the longer they sat in discomfort, the better. Her fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel as she thought about how things had played out. The luxury car showroom had been one of her investments for years, but it was clear that the staff there had lost sight of what truly mattered. They had been so focused on appearances, so quick to dismiss anyone who didn't fit their narrow idea of success, that they had failed to recognize the one thing that could have saved them from this mistake: respect. She hadn't come to humiliate anyone, but they had pushed her into this corner. Now, they would have to face the consequences. Eleanor's phone buzzed in her hand, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from her assistant. Everything is set. The press is aware of the situation, and the board members are ready to take action. Eleanor smiled faintly. It was time for them to understand the real power behind the scenes. They had no idea who they had messed with, but they were about to learn. The next day, the showroom buzzed with tension. It wasn't the usual excited chatter about new car arrivals or promotional events. No, this time the air was thick with regret. Every single person in that showroom now understood the gravity of what they had done, and it was only a matter of time before they would face the consequences of their actions. Tom, the manager, paced nervously in his office. He had received an email earlier that morning from the corporate office, and he knew it wasn't good news. The email didn't offer many details, but the one thing that stood out was the phrase, "The matter has escalated." Tom had tried to reach out to Eleanor, to apologize, but his calls went unanswered. The voicemail he left seemed so insignificant now. He could hear the voice of the investigator from yesterday echoing in his mind. She's not someone you can just apologize to. You need to prove you're worthy of her respect. Tom had spent most of the night thinking about what that meant. How could he prove himself? How could any of them? They had disrespected one of the most powerful women in the country, and now their jobs, their reputations, even the future of the showroom was at stake. Outside his office, the staff stood in quiet huddles, speaking in hushed tones. The salespeople, who had once prided themselves on their ability to close deals, now felt powerless. They knew they had messed up badly. Emma stood at her desk, her eyes scanning the showroom floor. She had never felt more out of place than she did at that moment. The guilt gnawed at her, and she could hardly look any of her colleagues in the eye. She had laughed at the elderly woman, too. She had been part of the ridicule. And now, it was too late to take it back. Jason, the young salesman, was pacing back and forth. He had barely slept. His thoughts kept racing back to the moment when he had made that cruel remark. It had seemed so harmless at the time. Just a joke. But now, he realized it had been a massive mistake. At that moment, the showroom door opened. A sleek black car pulled up to the entrance, and everyone stopped what they were doing. They turned their heads as the car's engine shut off. The person who stepped out of the vehicle was the last person anyone expected to see. It was Eleanor James. She had arrived, but not in the way anyone imagined. The elegant woman, whose presence had already shaken the foundation of the showroom, stepped out of her car with an air of calm confidence. She was dressed in a simple, yet sophisticated outfit, her blue scarf gracefully draped around her neck. The same scarf that had caught the attention of everyone the day before. Her entrance was almost like a scene from a movie. The silence in the showroom deepened, and everyone froze. They had expected a letter of reprimand, a corporate memo, or some kind of formal message. But this was different. She was here in person. Tom was the first to gather himself. He stepped out of his office, his voice filled with a nervous politeness. "Ms. James, we weren't expecting you. How can we assist you today?" Eleanor didn't immediately respond. She glanced around, her eyes moving from one person to the next. Then she spoke, her voice soft but powerful. "I think we need to talk." The way she said it sent a chill through the room. No one dared to speak. It was clear she wasn't here for small talk. She had come to make her presence known, and the showroom staff now had to face the full consequences of their actions. Eleanor led Tom into the conference room, where she asked the rest of the staff to join them. No one moved too quickly. They all understood the weight of the moment. They were about to hear things they had not anticipated. As everyone sat down, Eleanor spoke again, her eyes scanning the faces around the table. "I'll get straight to the point. I didn't come here today to make you feel guilty. I'm sure you already do that on your own, but I'm here to make something very clear." The room fell silent as she leaned forward, her voice steady. "You all made an assumption about me. Because of the way I looked, because I wasn't wearing a designer suit, you assumed I didn't belong here. That was your first mistake." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Eleanor's gaze sharpened, and she continued. "I'm not here to seek revenge. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen again, not just in your showroom, but in the industry as a whole. I am not just a billionaire, as you seem to have assumed. I have been in this industry for years, watching from the sidelines. But I've seen enough now." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Ms. James, we are so sorry for what happened. We truly are. It was an unfortunate misunderstanding, and we—" "Don't apologize to me," Eleanor interrupted. "You don't need to apologize to me. You need to apologize to yourselves. You've shown a level of ignorance and arrogance that could have cost you your jobs and this entire company." Her words were like daggers, cutting deep into their pride. But instead of reacting defensively, they listened, for they knew she was right. "Now," Eleanor continued, "I'm going to give you a choice. I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm here to offer you an opportunity to change, to grow, and to understand the importance of respect. You'll all be required to take part in a series of diversity training programs, and you'll also learn what it means to treat people with kindness, no matter how they look or where they come from." She paused again, letting her words sink in. "You'll have the chance to prove that you can do better, but the clock is ticking. You'll have to show me you've learned from this, or I will make sure you never see the inside of a showroom again." Tom swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. "We understand, Ms. James. We're ready to do whatever it takes." Eleanor stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Good. I'm giving you a chance to turn things around. But remember this, respect is something you earn. And you've got a long way to go." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving a trail of silent reflection behind her. The staff sat in stunned silence, processing the gravity of the situation. They had been given a second chance, a rare gift. But whether they would rise to the occasion or fall back into their old ways was still unknown. The days following Eleanor's visit were tense and filled with uncertainty. The staff at the showroom found themselves walking on eggshells, especially as the corporate headquarters was closely monitoring their every move. Tom, the manager, had never felt so much pressure in his entire career. The showroom had never looked emptier. The usual buzz of customers and the hum of excited sales conversations were replaced by a quiet, almost oppressive stillness. Employees came in early, left late, and worked harder than ever before. But the guilt never quite left the air. Emma sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen, but her thoughts were far away. The training sessions they had been required to attend were tough. They weren't just about diversity. They were about empathy, about learning to see the world through the eyes of others. And every session reminded her of how wrong she had been. She thought about Eleanor, the woman who had entered their showroom with nothing but kindness, and how they had treated her as though she was invisible. She had been wrong, and deep down, Emma knew this was her chance to become a better person. Emma wasn't the only one affected. Jason had come to a similar realization. He had always prided himself on his ability to close deals, but now he couldn't stop thinking about how many deals he had ruined with his arrogance and judgmental attitude. He realized that the woman he had mocked, had once laughed at, was more powerful than anyone he had ever met, and it was that very power, not money, that had commanded respect. He had learned, the hard way, that true success wasn't about wealth. It was about treating people with dignity. Tom, too, was grappling with his decisions. Every time he looked at his reflection in the showroom windows, he saw a man who had failed, not just as a manager, but as a human being. How could he have been so blind? He wondered. How could he have allowed such cruelty to happen under his watch? But Eleanor's challenge lingered in his mind. She hadn't come to punish them. She had come to teach them. And though he had been ashamed at first, he now saw the opportunity she had given them. A second chance. The showroom had to change, and it had to change fast. One morning, just a week after the intense training sessions had begun, Tom gathered everyone in the break room for a meeting. His face was serious but determined. "Everyone," he began, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of what they were about to do. "We've been given a chance to prove ourselves, and we can't waste it." The staff gathered around, looking at him, unsure of what to expect. They had been doing their best to make amends, but they knew this was no easy task. They weren't just trying to fix a mistake, they were trying to change. "We're going to take a bold step," Tom continued. "From today, we're going to offer a program for every customer who walks through this door. It's not just about selling them a car. It's about understanding them, listening to them, and building trust. We'll offer free consultations with the customer to help them choose a car, and we'll make sure to give each person the attention they deserve, regardless of how they look, what they wear, or what we think they can afford." The room was silent. They had all heard about customer service before, but this was something different. This was a new way of thinking. Emma raised her hand hesitantly. "But what about the staff? Should we apologize to everyone who was here when she came? Should we address our own mistakes directly?" Tom nodded. "Yes, we'll start by apologizing to anyone who walks through these doors. That means every customer, even if they didn't see the way we treated her. We'll show them the respect we should have shown all along." Jason stepped forward, his face full of resolve. "And what about us? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? We can't just say we've learned. We need to prove it. Tom smiled, proud of the change he was seeing in Jason. We'll all have to hold each other accountable. We're a team. And we'll make sure we never forget the lesson we learned from Eleanor. The meeting ended with a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. As they began their work, the staff approached every customer with renewed humility, patience, and respect. They no longer looked at people based on their appearance or how much money they had. They looked at them as individuals, each deserving of kindness. The real test, however, came a few days later. It was a busy afternoon when a well-dressed woman entered the showroom. She was accompanied by a younger man, her son perhaps. She moved confidently, but there was something about her that reminded Tom of Eleanor. He couldn't quite place it. The woman was elegant, but not flashy, just like Eleanor. Tom approached her with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, madam. How may we assist you today?" The woman returned his smile, though there was a knowing gleam in her eyes. "I'm just browsing for now," she said. "I've heard a lot about your showroom, but I wanted to see for myself." Tom nodded, and as he did, he noticed her son's eyes scanning the showroom floor. He looked familiar, almost too familiar. And then it hit him. He had seen him before. It was the same young man who had been with Eleanor that day. Tom's heart sank. Was this her son? Had Eleanor come back in disguise? The realization struck him hard. She had been watching, silently observing their every move. She had been testing them all along. The woman smiled gently. "I'm glad to see that your staff is taking your work seriously," she said, her voice calm but laced with a quiet power. "But there's something I wanted to discuss with you. My mother, Eleanor James, told me that I should pay a visit to see how things have changed here." Tom's face went pale. The woman was Eleanor's daughter. Suddenly, everything clicked. Eleanor hadn't just given them a second chance. She had been watching their progress every step of the way. And now, it seemed, her daughter was here to see if they had truly changed.